to begin this video on a disappointing note, but this is no new dawn for Mitsubishi in India. All the reports that you might have heard about recently about Mitsubishi coming back to India, that is all rubbish. The Mitsubishi Corporation, they are a major conglomerate. They are into banking, shipping, finance. I remember Mitsubishi Corporation even imports fish from India and exports it all over the world. So the Mitsubishi Corporation, one of their very small divisions, is investing in TVS Mobility to increase the scope and span of that dealership network and focus on bringing more Japanese manufacturers to India. Ironically, that investment is to grow the Honda dealership network of TVS Mobility. So Mitsubishi is not coming to India. All that enthusiasm about the brand coming back to India, that is misplaced. But the enthusiasm for the brand, is that misplaced? And of course, in India, back then, Mitsubishi, especially the Pajero, before the likes of the Audi Q7, BMWs, all of that came to India, that was the car that Bollywood and all the big shots in Mumbai, in Delhi, they rolled around in Pajeros. Why? That's what we're going to find out in this episode of Gone But Not Forgotten. And before we go ahead, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with like-minded enthusiasts, and of course stay subscribed to the Evo India channel.
I'm in my element, winning is just in my regiment.
The Montero was the last of the line, so the story ends here. The story starts with the 2.8 Pajero. This is the SFX, which is very familiar, but actually this was not the first Pajero to be made in India. That was the Pajero GLX. Now obviously this has all this off-road paraphernalia. This was not stock, but this was the narrow track and this was the first one to be made in India. But this whole story starts 6 months prior to that with this, the third generation Pajero, which was badged the Montero in India. So the Montero and 6 months later, the Pajero, both were sold at the same time. And that's why this carried the Montero badge and that stuck with the Pajero badge. So this is actually where our story starts. The Pajero officially came to India in mid of 2002. Before that, it came in as grey imports, but officially via HM Mitsubishi, that was mid 2002. And I still remember that issue of Overdrive magazine, June 2002, with the Pajero jumping on the cover. This was that car, not that same exact car, but this was that model, and it was first called the Pajero. Then they realized that they're going to bring the old Pajero to India, so it was quickly rebadged as the Montero. World over, Pajero, Montero was sold side by side because in some markets, Pajero meant a bad word.
Pajero.
So it couldn't be used as Pajero, so Montero. And in some markets, it was also called the Shogun. So plenty of names for the same car. Now, the big thing on this third generation Pajero, which was very contemporary at that time, is that it moved away from the ladder frame construction. So this was a monocoque with the ladder frame embedded into the chassis. That lowered the center of gravity. That gave it better torsional rigidity. That also gave it better performance, dynamics on road. Also, it got the 3.2 diesel engine. If I'm not wrong, at that time, this was probably the biggest engine that you could get in the country. And it got suspension that had evolved from the Dakar winning Pajero. So this is where the whole story started of the Pajero in India. So obviously, this is where we're going to start our driving. Let me take you back to 2002, throw some perspective about what we are looking at over here. That very same issue of Overdrive, where we had the Pajero jumping on the cover, that same issue of Overdrive also had the first drive report on the Indica V2. The Indica V2 was hip, it was happening. And then we had the Pajero. That month it was still called the Pajero, only a month or two later would it be rebadged the Montero. But we had the Pajero. Now pricing. The Indica was what, 3.5, 4 lakh rupees. This one was 34 lakh rupees, 10 times more, okay? 10 times more. I was on that Indica test, so that's why back then I didn't even get to sit in it. I didn't even see the Montero / Pajero when it came to the office. Adil did the road test and he was raving about it. There were so many things that we had never seen before.
This was a proper luxury car. You had a cassette player with Mitsubishi Motors branding on it, and you had a CD player. You had heated seats, which was of no use, but you had it. You had wood finish on the dash. You had a half wood steering wheel, which was the preserve of Mercs back then. You had only a manual gearbox. The automatic would come later on. You had twin zone climate control. The ride comfort, that's something else. Up front, it has got double wishbones with the torsion bar of the Pajero replaced by coil springs. At the rear, it has that multi-link suspension developed from their Dakar winning Pajeros. Dynamically, this was super impressive. Then the engine, 3.2 litre 4-cylinder engine. That means every cylinder was 800 cc. It's a mega engine. And the benefit is that incredible amount of torque. It feels like it can conquer the Dakar. And remember, this generation of the Pajero went to the Dakar as a T2 production car and it won. It made 162 bhp, 370 odd Newton meters of torque. 0 to 100 took 13.48 seconds. The quarter mile took 19 seconds. And Adil in his road test described that as explosive performance. But of course, it was also incredibly expensive, and that's why you hardly see any of this generation Montero. No story on Mitsubishi is complete without a look at the motorsport pedigree. With the Lancer and the Evos, they dominated the World Rally Championship. And with the Pajero, they dominated the Paris-Dakar. That was when the Paris-Dakar started in Paris and went to Dakar in Africa, where it went through the Saharan dunes. And out there, Mitsubishi, it is the winningest manufacturer at the Dakar. 12 rally victories. I think it was 5 on the trot overall victories. It started with the very first generation Pajero. Then this second generation, it also took part in the Dakar.
Yeah, all black be the SUV. Money call, I'm like BRB. I'm an S-Player, you a SRT.
With the 2.8 litre diesel engine, the Pajero never had enough power, so it was never used for rallying. But in the off-roading circuit, this was extremely popular, extremely capable. You put a set of mud tires on it and it can do some crazy stuff. But for this story, we're going to stick with tarmac. 6 months after that Montero came the Pajero. This 2.8 was assembled in India. This was the second generation Pajero. The Montero was the third generation. So this was a much older version that was coming to India. But in those days, India only got hand-me-downs. And HM Mitsubishi were a masters at sending hand-me-downs to India. So this old Pajero came to India. And the price, okay, it went down significantly by some 14 lakhs compared to the Montero, but this was still 25 lakhs. And by the affordability criteria of those days, this was still an expensive SUV. But it was also in a class kind of on its own. There was no hardcore SUV to rival the Pajero. And I remember I did that road test and I loved it. Jan 2003, that was the issue of Overdrive where I did the road test of the Pajero. The GLX, the SFX would come later on. I sent it sideways and I lived out all my Paris-Dakar fantasy. The suspension at the back, it does bounce around a bit because that's a live axle. But when you compare it with other live axle cars that came later on, for instance, the first generation Thar, this was so much more planted than that Thar. You got airbags. In those days, airbags was a really big deal. And you got airbags as standard. And you had to get used to this engine because it demanded a lot of shifting. It came on boost around 1750 RPM and that boost stayed on till 3000 RPM. You could rev it past 3000, but you just got a lot of noise and not much proportionate increase in forward velocity. At 120 kilometers per hour, this was almost near its rev limit. I think the top speed was only 140 kilometers per hour. It was short geared and that's why it accelerated well, but even accelerated well up to 60 kilometers or maybe 80 kilometers per hour, because 100 took some 19.8 seconds, nearly 20 seconds to 100. So that initial short gearing had its major drawbacks because it did not have a long-legged feel. On the highway, it was a bit exhausting because it would be at a much higher rev than you wanted to. The Fortuner had come along a couple of years later, and that would tick along easily at 120 kmph cruise. This one was noisy and strained at 120, and that also affected the fuel economy. This one gave between 6 and 8 kilometers to the liter. Good thing it had a massive 92-liter fuel tank, but this had a healthy appetite for diesel.
Long live the legacy. You and I'm the level we on. Little homie, better watch your tone. I'm dangerous when I'm in my zone. Play on, play on, play on.
4 years later, in 2007, came the Pajero SFX. Now, this facelift was internationally seen in 1998, but it took many years, 2007, to finally come down to India. Visually, the main differences are the new headlamps, the new bumper, but the body was also wider. The Pajero SFX also came in this, at least to me, slightly weird two-tone body color. A lot of people liked it. I wasn't a big fan of it, and the rumor was that Mitsubishi in India didn't have a big enough paint booth to paint the entire Pajero in one go. So the main shell was all in white. The body colors were only the doors and the bonnet, the fender also. And it was said that back then the entire shell came in as white, fully painted from wherever, Japan, wherever it was made. And then these panels were painted in India and bolted onto the car. Do you know the actual story? Let us know in the comments. The Pajero was expensive, 25 lakh rupees. It came with central locking, but it had a major flaw in the design, especially the anti-theft system. So carjackers could easily gain entry into the Pajero using the rear doors. Apparently, a lot of Pajeros were actually stolen from the very building they were parked in, because people just opened the rear door, jumped into the Pajero and drove off with it. So much so that the Mumbai police commissioner had actually shot off a letter to Mitsubishi telling them to upgrade the security systems of the Pajero. Typically, Mitsubishi, in the fashion of those days, they said that nothing is wrong with the Pajero, but a lot of these were stolen because it was really easy to gain access to. The Pajero, keeping with the times, had a lot of plastic inside, and it also had a bit of plasto wood. Those days, this plasto wood was a sign of a premium car. Obviously, very soon this started to look a bit dated, but what I really like about the interiors are these 3 gauges right on top over here. You have your altimeter, you have your inclination, and you also have your temperature. Plus, this was a true blue off-roader. And the sign of any true blue off-roader, you have a big sunshade and a further extension. So your eyes are always shielded from the sun. Super Select 4x4, that was a cool badge, but even cooler was this intercooler turbo sticker out here. These days it seems inconsequential, but in those days, that sticker, it signified a really mighty car. Now, the Pajero had a lot of cool things going for it. The spare wheel was hung onto the back of the tailgate, but this was a solid tailgate. This tailgate never rattled, no matter how old the Pajero was on. It was built really well. You could open it, and then using this lever, you could actually lock it in place. It's locked in place, so it does not shut on you. You could probably have a picnic out here. Not much in the way of a boot with the 3rd row up. But check this out. This is the toolkit, so neatly integrated. Some pieces are missing, but such a nice toolkit. Another nice touch, it had a torch. And this torch is magnetic, so you can stick it out here. And it's got a cigarette lighter, so you can plug it into the cigarette lighter out there, so don't have to worry about batteries also. Mitsubishi, they made really smart, intelligent cars back in those days. Expensive cars, but very well engineered. So another nice touch it had was this grab handle on the B-pillar. So you use that to climb into the back seat of the Pajero, and
it had an armrest on the left side, so on the left and right side, not in the center but on the sides. Very unique. I think this is the only vehicle I've driven with an armrest, a foldable armrest on the side, not in the center of the screen. This was also a proper 7-seater, and at the back you had these sliding windows, but it had proper air conditioning, it had dual zone air conditioning, so this in terms of keeping your passengers cool was not a problem. Also a nice side step for you to jump out of the Pajero.
You and on the level we on, little homie better watch your tone.
The SFX was a facelift, and that meant no mechanical changes. So the 4M40 diesel engine, the 2.8 litre intercooled diesel engine, turbocharged but no common rail diesel, that was retained. So first it made 116 bhp, and then when it had to be upgraded for the emission norms, power went down by 10 bhp. So it went down to 106 or 107 bhp. So it became even slower. The 0 to 100, that took 19.98 seconds. I think that went up to nearly 20 seconds. So it was a bit labored on the highways. 120 kilometers per hour translated to 3,300 or 3,500 RPM. So at the speed limit, this engine was noisy and you could hear it. But the entire chassis makeup was such that it stayed blunted and stable. So even over bumpy, wavy roads, you could feel it. It had that kind of boaty feel, but it was always stable. It always gave you confidence. And plus, when you sit so high up, you feel like the king of the world. This is a pure ladder frame. This is as old school gets. If somebody asks you what an SUV is supposed to feel like, you put them in a Pajero, the GLX or the SFX. The gearbox, it's an old school 5-speed manual gearbox. The steering, it is not a rack and pinion, it is a recirculating ball steering. The rear axle is a live axle. So if you go a little too fast over speed breakers, it does hop around. You go around a corner, there's a generous amount of body roll. You step on the throttle, and you can hear every decibel of that diesel engine. It does give you a fair workout. You do get tired after a while, but it's all in the quest of something. For the Pajero driver, things don't come easy. They work for it. And when they work for it, they appreciate it that much more. The four-wheel drive system, the legendary four-wheel drive system. Now this is the Super Select 1 system. It has a 50-50 front-rear torque distribution. You have multiple modes. So you have your 2-wheel high, you have your 4-wheel high, and then you have your 4 low with and without the locked center differential. So capability-wise, this is really good. So the Pajero continued in production till 2012. That was when Mitsubishi brought in the Pajero Sport, and the Pajero Sport was a contemporary rival to the Fortuner. Bigger engine, more power, more space, more modern to look at, and that was just some 2.5 lakh rupees more than the Pajero SFX. So nobody in their right mind wanted to buy a Pajero SFX, and that was the final nail in its coffin. I came out of that darkness, shadows knew where I started, met my demons incarnate, move with passion. The 4th generation Pajero came in 2007. It was called the Montero. It replaced the 3rd generation Montero, and it was called the Montero because the old workhorse, the Pajero, was still doing duty. In fact, that very year, the Pajero SFX was launched, which was the facelift on the earlier version. Now, this looks a little similar to the 3rd generation, but they say that 3/4 of the components were new. It retained a 3.2 diesel engine, but it got common rail diesel injection, so more power, more torque, better in terms of efficiency. The body, it was a little more strengthened, so it had better torsional rigidity. The interiors were completely updated. It got the option of an automatic gearbox as well, and this felt very refined for its time. Expensive, 32 odd lakh rupees, and it came in as a CBU. The 3.2 DID engine, it was upgraded with common rail injection. That was for better emissions and of course more power. So in this spec, it made 162 bhp and 373 Newton meters of torque, and towards the latter half when it had that slight facelift, the engine was further upgraded to meet those Euro 4 emission norms, and then power went up to 192 bhp and torque went up to 441 Newton meters. But they say the internals of this engine are so strong that it can take a lot of tuning. You can really boost this engine up, and of course it's reliable as hell. The inside of the 4th gen Pajero, which was called Montero in India, got considerably more upmarket, and even today this does look contemporary and very handsome. So keeping with the times, the amount of wood was reduced, so you just had this one sliver out here and a sliver on the edge plus on the doors, and this does not look like plaster wood. This looks like wood. Whether it's actual wood, I don't know, but it looks sort of like wood. You got this two-tone dash color, black on top, beige at the bottom. A nice finish, doesn't feel too plasticky. It had this Rockford Fosgate sound system, which I had a Outlander that also had the Rockford sound system, and it sounded fantastic. Proper bass. In fact, in that time, I don't think any sound system was better than the Rockford ones that came in the Mitsubishis. It has a 6 CD player inbuilt, so inbuilt 6 CD player which would also read MP3s. But Rohan, the owner, tells me that if you put in a pirated CD, it could get stuck inside. So he's never put pirated CDs into this. Keeping with the whole go anywhere theme, the Montero continued to have this retractable element in the sun visor. Very nice touch. Proper 4x4 Super Select 2. This was the same as the earlier Montero. Obviously the platform was improved in terms of the stiffness, but the space remained more or less the same, and actually pretty comfortable. You had controls on the steering wheel, which again for that time was way ahead of what everything else got. Some silver touches all over the place. Here you could put credit cards. I don't know who put credit cards, but you could put credit cards now. If you have a FASTag, you can actually keep it out there. It got seat heaters, not coolers, seat heaters. This was a European spec, and that probably explains why it couldn't take Indian heat. The dash was prone to cracking. A crack has just appeared. A week before Rohan tells me a crack has appeared out here. The vents, they were also prone to breaking. So he's put this white thing out there. That is a 3D printed part to hold the vents in place. But apart from these small little things, the Montero and the Pajero, they were built like tanks. They were really built to last. Like the Pajero, the Montero also got a nice grab handle on the B-pillar to haul yourself at the back. You got plenty of space, though under thigh support was a bit lanky. Now, unlike the Pajero, you got an armrest in the center. So this became a 7-seater from the 6-seater that the actual original Pajero was. You got your separate aircon controls for the rear. So a lot of luxury touches. And this leather, okay, now because of age, it is beginning to show cracks, but it still feels extremely premium. And you get this overall smell of that actual genuine leather that really screams quality. Remember how the Pajero had the center armrest on the sides actually? On the Montero also, there's something on the sides. It's not the center armrest because you have a center armrest out here. But let me show you what it does. So you can recline this middle row. Then you go to the other side, recline this row, 60-40 split. Now you recline the front seat. Ron, if you can help me please. You take off your shoes in the meantime. You wait. And now you have a full bed. And what does that thing on the side do? It actually is like a cushion and prevents you from hitting the hard plastic of the rear wheel arches. So that's sort of like a cushion. And if you want to sleep, you got a nice bed. You actually have a full size bed. Business class seats are also not this wide. This is like Singapore Airlines business class seats. A nice wide bed. So you can actually tour the country. Don't need to stop at a hotel. You can sleep in the Montero. Maybe you can put a small portable loo at the back. Really nice, intelligent engineering. Keeping with tradition, the Montero also had the spare wheel mounted on the tailgate. This actually went up to 17 inches, so far heavier, but it was built solid. No squeaks, no rattles. Now, out here, actually, like the Pajero, you could also lock the tailgate in place so that it wouldn't open, suppose you had parked it on a slope. Now, out here, this is where you had the toolkit. This flap was for the windshield washer, for the rear washer wipe, and these two flaps out here, that was to unbolt the spare wheel. You had your speakers for your Rockford Fosgate sound system, your subwoofer out here. Here it's only called Rockford. I think maybe in the Montero or in the Outlander it was called Rockford Fosgate. Now, how do you get the third row up? You had a flat floor. Now, this was a long time ago, but even then you had a flat floor. You remove this panel and your third row folds out from the floor. Now, this takes a little getting used to. So this slides out here, and then you had the headrest neatly positioned in the floor. Put your headrest out there, and then using this lever, actually this lever. No, which lever? Yeah. And that's how you put the third row in place. Like I said, takes a bit of getting used to. This is interesting. Come over to this side. You see these things embedded in the rear three-quarter glass? That's not a defogger. That's your antenna that was embedded in this glass. Cool touches. They really don't make them like they used to. There's so many little things to point out, little details to play around with. Today in modern cars, what do? You play with a 56-inch screen.
Come to it, this the new age. That's iconic. Watch the way I move, so iconic. Watch the way I move, That's iconic.
I want to give you a rationale for why these SUVs are still so cool today. So Rohan, who bought this, I think 2 years ago, he bought it for 8.5 lakh rupees. Now, this is an old vehicle. It's like some 10-15 years old. But at 8.5 lakh rupees, you can get a Maruti Suzuki Ignis, a Tata Tiago, or you could get yourself a used Mitsubishi Montero. Now, bear with me. Obvious question would be that parts are ridiculously expensive. Where can you even get parts? There are no dealers. And fair enough, that is true. But if you know the right people, and especially in Southeast Asia, because Mitsubishi did sell a lot of these in Southeast Asia, you can get parts in Southeast Asia and bring them down. A set of dampers that were replaced on this Montero, that cost 25,000 bucks. 25,000 bucks. I'm not kidding. 25,000 bucks for a set of dampers. They replaced the dual mass flywheel because that was like a weak spot. That cost some 50,000 rupees. And apart from that, nothing else needed to be changed. He says this is reliable to a fault. And just think about it. 8.5 lakh rupees. You got this big diesel engine. You got this ridiculously capable four-wheel drive system. The seats are very comfortable. The ride quality is again very good. Now Rohan says that this is a bit of a pain to drive in the city, but honestly I don't think so. I find it actually very nice and easy to drive. And unlike the Pajero, the SFX and the GLX, this has enough torque that you don't need to keep shifting gears. This generation also came with an automatic gearbox, and that automatic gearbox was rugged as hell. It was shared with the Land Cruiser and the Lexus LX. So incredibly reliable ASIN automatic gearbox. And what's not to love about this? except for the price. When it was new, it was ridiculous. Though when you come to think of it, the fourth generation was priced at around 35 lakh rupees, which was the same price that the third generation was launched at 5 years ago. So in terms of comparative value for money, this was actually very good value for money.
This Montero was discontinued in 2012. Who wanted a Mitsubishi at 30, 35 odd lakh rupees? But then 4 years later, they reintroduced the Montero to India, this time as a CBU, and the price went up. The price went up by a ridiculous amount. It went up to 71 lakh rupees. And for that increase in price, well, you got a slight facelift on the headlamps. The engine, it was upgraded to the newer emission norms. It got a variable geometry turbo, so slightly more power and torque. But otherwise, it was the same. Obviously, nobody wanted it at that price because that was more than the Q7, the X5, all those German luxury SUVs that were proliferating at that time. And this quietly had to be discontinued. And this was where the line ended. Mitsubishi were once a mighty corporation. The story goes that when Maruti Udyog was being incorporated, they scouted the world for partners. In Japan, they met with Mitsubishi. And it's said that the Maruti executives, they were so unnerved by that massive boardroom at the Mitsubishi headquarters, by the dozens of senior Mitsubishi executives packed into that room, that they got unnerved. They said that Mitsubishi is way too big for the small little Maruti Udyog to partner with. And that's why that partnership did not work out. But a lot of startups, car companies in the Asian region owe their origins to Mitsubishi. They were actually very generous. Hyundai, for instance, all their initial cars were Mitsubishis. The accent was the Lancer, and they even had the first generation Pajero. So Mitsubishi is responsible for this burgeoning car industry in the Asian region. But today, where is Mitsubishi? What do they have? In fact, the Mitsubishi Car Corporation, that is part of the Renault-Nissan alliance. And in India, Renault and Nissan, first they need to get their house in order. No point they bringing a third brand in. They tried that with Datsun, it did not work out. Now no point them bringing Mitsubishi back. It's a good thing that Mitsubishi, they're not bringing it back because the brand reputation, the passion that it evokes amongst enthusiasts is still extremely strong. That tribe of enthusiasts might be strong, but they really love the brand. And these Pajeros, they bring back such fond memories of my growing years when we had all of these alive and kicking in India. Mitsubishi is gone, but it's fondly remembered. What are your memories of Mitsubishi? What are your memories of the Pajero? Let us know in the comments. Give us a shout out. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Hit the subscribe button to stay tuned to all our video drops. We have plenty more in this Gone But Not Forgotten series. If you have any suggestions on what we should feature next, let us know in the comments. And thank you for watching. Looking forward to driving back home.